5%, really? You think it's that?
I think it's 5%.
Out here.
Or less.
Yeah, here.
Yeah, political suicide here in Montana to mention sales tax.
Who cares what the tax rate is? How much money are you losing to taxes? That's the question.
Welcome to Montana Whiskey, Wealth, and Freedom.
Well, I've been in love, I've been on the ground, I've gotten back on my feet, just to fall back down on my knees for you and your whiskey under the bridge.
Welcome to the Whiskey, Wealth, and Freedom Show. Happy Tax Day, everybody.
Tax day to the free. Have you tried the Million Acre Bourbon?
I have not.
Try it. It's worth it.
Okay.
So the title of the episode that we're doing today is called Taxed at Every Turn.
Smooth.
That's good, right? Mm-hmm. From prohibition to financial independence. Did you hear the first part of that, Kyle?
Tax at every turn.
Taxed at every turn, okay. So how many times do you think your money gets taxed in your lifetime? Is it once, twice, or every single time it moves?
Every single time it moves.
Michael, what do you think?
Quite a bit. I should know the answer to this, but I want to say that about 86 cents out of every dollar over the course of time. I can't remember the time frame. I want to say it was like in 10 years, 86 cents out of every dollar is taxed.
Karen?
I'm going to say it depends.
I mean, obviously, that's a little bit of the leading question. Once, twice, or like every single time if Rick moves. It's kind of a... So what if the biggest problem isn't how much you make income-wise, but how much leaks out along the way? So what is more important between how much you make or how much you end up keeping? How much you make or how much you keep of what you make? Gross or net?
Well, I mean, what you go home with is obviously pretty important, but I would rather make more money at a higher tax rate than less money at a lower tax rate. But it still matters what you go home with.
What do you think, Kyle?
Yeah, the net number is all that matters. If I'm making $1 million and getting taxed at a higher rate, but I'm netting 200,000, let's just say, versus 250,000 and netting 150, I'd rather be making the $1 million.
Sure.
Right? Even though I'm paying way more in taxes because it's more to me. So the net is honestly what I care about. It's how you get to the net, I think, that matters.
Well, that's what this conversation is going to be all about. So what do you think, honey?
Yeah, I mean, and not only that, it's not even just about making, but actually keeping of once you do actually get it home, how do you keep it from getting all those other times that it can be taxed? Not just on like payroll taxes or something else, but, how do you keeping more of it?
So by the end of this episode, we'll address that the tax system didn't always exist the way it does today. And not only how individuals lost control, but how they can reclaim it both now and in the future. Quick intros, and what I'd like to do is I'm gonna do the quick intro myself, but I'm gonna do it one at a time, and I would like everybody to answer when I introduce you. If you had to design a tax system from scratch, what would you choose to tax? Because we, of course, have to tax something, right? It's not probable or practical to say, well, there doesn't have to be any tax at all. So you've got to pick something, okay? Kyle, let's start with you. You're an agent with Create Tailwind and an IBC professional and practitioner. So if you had to design a tax system from scratch, what would you choose to tax?
I would tax the thing that the most people use. And so that would either be roadways, railways, anything that is for transportation, or that would be power, the usage of power.
Interesting. That is not one that I anticipated. That's cool. How would you describe that tax? Just a usage, because a lot of times sometimes it's a fee, sometimes it's a tax, but essentially it's just a tax.
I mean, it's like you just go to any big city and they've got a fare to go across their bridges, right? That's all that is tax, right? You're paying for the usage of something.
Right.
Though I think that's where with taxes we're paying for the usage of our own money. We're paying for the usage of earning money. That doesn't make sense to me. But paying for the usage of something that has been created for that is a benefit that I get to actually experience. When I pay for that usage as I use it, it's more real, and I can get behind that.
Like essentially like a public good.
Yeah.
Right. So
yeah, totally.
Yeah, that falls in line with a true concept of general welfare as opposed to special welfare. All right. Next, Michael Manley. Thank you for coming back, Michael. Second time at the table. Entrepreneur and business owner. Your business is Odyssey Computer Repair, and you are also a homestead farmer. So if you had to design a tax system from scratch, what would you choose to tax?
Well, Kyle kind of stole mine, even though he went first. But, and it's weird to say this in light of everything going on politically, but I formulated these ideas a couple decades ago, and I believe the only fair constitutional taxes would be excise taxes, tariffs, or sales taxes. And I believe the reason why they work better is because you're taxing a particular activity. Like, for example, right now there is road tax in the price of a gallon of gasoline or diesel, but people with electric cars are not paying anything. And so if the intent is to fund the road system through that, then we would need to find a way that we could tax the people using the roads and not the people that aren't using the roads. So I'm not a big fan of property tax or income tax. I think those are evil and unconstitutional, and they hamper productivity. A lot of people make their decisions based not on what's productive or needed for society, but what is a better tax system for their business. So, I would say if you want to tax alcohol, only the people that drink alcohol would be paying that tax. The people that don't drink any alcohol would not be shouldering that burden. But again, I don't think the government has authority to just tax whatever they want. I think that in the public welfare, roads would be applicable. I'd have to think through specific products and services, but I'm not sure the government has a right to tax alcohol. I don't know what their business is in alcohol.
So a lot there. Interestingly, because I agree with the whole premise or concept of direct taxation versus indirect taxation, which, of course, constitutionally speaking, and to the founders, their intention was that we would only ever get taxed on a direct basis. Mm-hmm. And when, of course, with the inception of the income tax in 1913, which I think probably was used earlier than that, then they instituted an income tax during the Civil War temporarily.
They had an early version in the Civil War.
Yeah, which of course is considered an indirect tax. And I guess, and I don't know off the top of my head, there was a Supreme Court case that basically said that and this is where they established precedent, which is of course always a problem because they're not going off of a originalist position, but they're doing, well, the precedent is that the Supreme Court case says you can now tax this even though the Constitution says otherwise. Therefore, it resets the bar, the standard for what you can get away with taxing and what you can't tax. But so we'll get into more of that as we get into the show. You guys both kind of threw me for loops and went heavier than I anticipated, but good for you. Karen, what do you think, honey? Oh, sorry. Let me introduce you. You're a certified liability advisor and mortgage professional with CMG Home Loans. So what would you tax if you had to tax anything from a system standpoint?
I would be a consumption tax person that, if I choose to buy it, then I know that there's some tax on it and I can choose not to buy it.
In line with kind of what Michael was saying, as far as like it only seems to make the most sense and be the most fair if it's a choice where I am getting taxed on what I choose to spend, and if somebody doesn't make that same choice, then they don't have to shoulder that burden.
I do like being in Montana where we don't pay sales tax on everything.
Yes, but we do have income tax. If we were Wyoming, where we
Yeah.
had sales tax but no income tax, and then all the tourists would pay our taxes, I would be way happier with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like Wyoming's system a little better, but I will say
Because it's the opposite. It's sales tax, no income tax.
correct. But I do think, and again, this sounds weird in our current political climate, but I really think tariffs should play a big role in the government's budget and easing the burden off of consumers and citizens. I think you could fund the entire military off of tariffs if it was done properly.
Well, shoot, if you could just get the genie back in the bottle and actually have the federal government do the only 18 enumerated powers that it was designed to do.
It wouldn't need nearly as much money.
Need as much money. So you probably could get away with funding it with the tariffs and excise taxes like they used to pre-1913.
Yep.
So whiskey moment. So we are starting the second quarter of 2026 with 3 new products. We've got the Cattle Dog whiskey in the center, the Snowcrest Huckleberry Vodka, and the Green Truck Gin. And so these 3 are available now for purchase. And of course, use the promo code TREASURE for discounts if you want to order all 3 on either the Treasure State Advisors website or Willie's Distillery's website, and use that promo code. You will get free shipping if you buy 3 bottles or more, and 15% off any of their merchandise. So that's all I really wanted to mention about the different products. I just wanted to kind of throw them out there, let everybody know we've got some new products to try. But as far as the rest of the whiskey moment goes, so this wasn't always the system. Before 1913, how was the federal government funded?
Basically, how we just talked about, a lot of it was through tariffs. And they actually... in the early days, roads, for example, were funded primarily through tolls, if I understand the history that I've read correctly. And I actually think that that's a better way to do it, is if the government's going to build roads, then they can charge tolls on the people that use those roads. Why should we pay taxes on roads we don't use? And if somebody has, let's say, for example, if I start a dirt works business and I'm driving a dump truck 12 hours a day, I should probably pay more tolls than somebody who works from home and doesn't put any impact on the roads.
Right.
So I think that tolls, while they're not fun, is actually a legal and moral way to do that.
Well, I think there was because where I'm going with this is just how important actually the excise taxes were on alcohol pre-1913, and how largely the federal government was funded by both tariffs and those excise taxes on like an alcohol tax as an example. I guess that was probably the primary one. But interestingly enough, so just a guess, based on alcohol alone, pre-1913, what would be your guess of percentage of how much the federal government was funded by the taxes that they got off of alcohol sales?
I would say like 30%.
Michael?
I have no idea.
I might go with 40%.
Yeah, it was 30 to 40%. So you guys are
Nice.
spot on.
Nice.
Yeah. So what changed then after the 16th Amendment in 1913?
I'm not aware. Did they lower taxes or keep them the same?
16th Amendment was the advent of the
Right.
Income tax.
Right.
income
No,
tax.
I'm aware of that. But as far as alcohol and everything else goes, did they change?
Outlawed it.
No, that didn't happen until 1918. The 16th Amendment in 1913 was the first time that the federal government introduced not
Sure.
the first time, but that was the first.
Sure.
That was when they reinitiated the income tax.
That was their attempt to legalize it because it was struck down before.
Go into more detail about that, please.
I wasn't prepared, but I know that they tried it during the Civil War.
That's okay. None of us are tax experts or
I
history
know they
experts.
tried
so-
it during the Civil War in the North, and it was struck down. I think the judiciary struck it down during the first attempt. And so they knew they had to get something in the Constitution to try to legalize it. And I don't want to go down a rabbit trail, but there's some interesting court cases about the 16th Amendment. So
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, of course, was around the World War I and the cost associated with going to war. And when Wilson finally decided to actually pull the trigger on getting involved, it became something that became imperative for the federal government to figure out how to fund, and therefore they worked their magic and figured out how to make it legal when it was never legal. Well, I guess under exception. But so the question is did income tax make prohibition possible, or did prohibition make income tax necessary?
You asking a chicken and egg question or what?
I mean, I don't know. Like, okay, so was it possible? So prior to 1913, they were never able to get away with a prohibition movement. Why?
Just because they relied on it too much is what you're saying?
Yes, sir. Yeah, they just didn't. Culturally, there wasn't, or politically, there wasn't enough of a push for the prohibition movement to remove that source of revenue for the federal government. So it really wasn't until the advent of the income tax before the federal government can say, you know what? From a morality standpoint, all of you people out there that are stumping for to make alcohol sales and consumption illegal, go nuts, because now we have a replacement revenue stream that we no longer need alcohol tax to fund the government. So
I think that's one of the ways they sold it. And so many times throughout history, the government tries to paint a picture different than what ends up being the reality when there's new laws or taxes. I think they jumped on board with a movement that was already happening. I think that the prohibition movement was already well underway, and I think that they harnessed that for their purposes. But I think there's other factors involved too. I think that a bigger factor, in my opinion, would be the industrialization of America and the concentration of populations in cities versus in rural areas like farms and ranches. I think that made the income tax possible, whereas it could not have happened 20 years or 30 years or 100 years before that.
from a collection standpoint, from a process standpoint, is that what you mean?
I'm talking culturally. I think that the culture was shifting so much during that time frame that I think that they were able to pull off things that they couldn't have done earlier.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What would have been the difference culturally from a urban center standpoint than the rural center or the rural areas?
Well, if you look all throughout America's history, you see a lot of emphasis on self-reliance, a lot of independent thinking. There were several rebellions that happened even in the late 1700s, though.
The Whiskey Rebellion.
Whiskey Rebellion and some of those things. And the Alien and Sedition Act under John Adams. That
didn't have anything to do with the tax, though, did it?
Well, I think you can see a common thread that Americans wanted to be left alone and they wanted to be independent, and they, at least early on, wanted to minimize the powers that the government could exercise because they frankly wanted as minimal government as possible. And then you fast forward to the Industrial Revolution, and you start hearing rhetoric like the government should break up monopolies, the antitrust stuff.
Right.
You start seeing people asking the government to get involved in areas of their lives that the government was prohibited from being involved in before, like business. If you would have talked to somebody in John Adams or Jefferson's era about getting the government involved in business to regulate something, they would have flipped their lid. Like, the government, in their opinion, had no business being involved in business. But then just, another 60, 70 years after that, you see people inviting the government into all those areas of their lives. And then, jumping ahead a little bit from 1913, you see FDR and the New Deal, and you now see the government being invited into cradle to grave, taking care of people, both at the workplace for safety and in their retirement and in all these other areas of their life that people never even would have thought that the government should be involved in earlier.
Well, very interesting too, because of course, because of the New Deal and the federal government became once again more expensive, all of a sudden now we have the passage of the 18th Amendment, which was the repeal of prohibition and allowed the government now to go back to taxing, like now drinking, making and producing drinking alcohol was legal again. So now they could tax it legally and actually add that back into the revenue stream, which I think is one of the reasons why, Kyle, you were saying like about like here in Montana, you like not having a sales tax, and there's always a big kerfuffle over, and anybody, it's political suicide here in Montana to mention sales tax. And it's like people come out with the daggers, right? Because the concern is that you're not going to replace what we have with that. You're going to add or stack on top of what we have with a whole new tax. So now we're getting taxed both on our income and on our sales or consumption. So I think that's kind of, and there is historical precedent to back that up with what you were just saying, Michael, that, okay, we did away with prohibition, or we did away with the alcohol tax because of prohibition, allowed the income tax to come in and replace that. And then they repealed prohibition to tax alcohol again because they needed yet more funding.
Yep.
But income tax never went away, even though it was deemed a temporary tax.
They do that every time. They claim that something's going to be temporary. I have read some of the rhetoric that was used during the 16th Amendment, and they were telling people that this is a tax that corporations and the super rich will pay, and it's not going to affect the common man. And they were also using rhetoric like this will be temporary.
Yep.
It's going to be temporary because we've got some big things going on in the world, and it's not going to affect the common person. But exactly what you see is that it's now used on everybody, and it never went away. And the tax on alcohol came back. The government does that every time.
That whole idea that it's not going to affect the common man. It's just going to be for the rich and everybody.
Yeah.
The thing that I think is sad that most people don't catch is that the customer pays for everything. So yeah, it's going to come out of the pockets initially of the big business, but the big business got big business because they were smart and they know how to make a profit. Well, if now they have more cost, they pass it to the customer. And we don't even think like that.
But the movement started long before the 16th Amendment. The movement started with the antitrust stuff and going after Rockefeller and Standard Oil and this whole idea that the government has to regulate business, and these really successful people must be successful because they're doing something wrong, and therefore the government is going to enforce morality on them.
What happens when a government shifts from taxing consumption to taxing production? So, like, what does that do to the makeup of the culture itself?
Well, I think psychologically it's a little bit destroying, because if I know it's going to cost more now for me to produce something, then now I'm weighing, do I produce or do I not produce? And as soon as we stop giving, as soon as we stop producing, everything starts to fall apart, because production is needed for growth.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because you want to incentivize people to produce more because that grows the economy more. But when you actually tax the activity of production, then it kind of makes people... So they did get around that, right? This is one of the things you love to talk about is the whole like the payroll tax. Right. So they realized that they couldn't make it very as obvious. They didn't need it. They couldn't have it be visible how the taxation was occurring. So not only do you tax the income, the production side of our existence, but now you've got to make it automatic.
Put it behind the curtain and go, there's nothing to see here.
Yeah. Right. So the exemption or the payroll, why do I keep saying exemptions? The payroll
taxes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just the fact that they put the employer's in charge of taking that money, because if you had to write the check every quarter as an employee, you would see that. That was one of my very 23 years old, first like real job. And my employer called me in and he's like, look, I going to give you a raise and this is how much I'm going to give you. And I know that feels like not much at all, but I want to know what this 50-cent raise to you costs me. And he had it all lined out and handed me a paper that showed exactly how much he had to pay in taxes to employ me, and that giving me that extra 50 cents would it actually cost him. And he's like, I'd love to give you all of this, but you have to vote right. And so it was very interesting. But ever since then I was like, and the number of people, I always laugh when people are like, oh, I'm getting a refund. I'm like, you're getting your money back because you don't even get that you were giving them too much because you were just letting them take it without ever looking at it.
And how much interest did you make on that money while the IRS was holding it?
Social media this time of year blows my mind.
I know.
People, the government becomes the hero, the tax refunds, they're planning their vacations, they're buying new vehicles. None of them seem to realize it's their own money.
Well, and it's so crazy, though. I mean, also because our code is so crazy. I mean, I've seen some of the craziest stuff when it comes to people's like taxes of like a trust fund kid who was, buying a condo, but he was a ski instructor. And so because that was his income, he received an earned income credit. So he got back from the government more than he paid in taxes, or he didn't pay tax. He ended up getting an extra credit. And meanwhile, he had this massive trust fund, but because of how it was set up, it wasn't taxed. And so it didn't come again. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, how do we live in, like, this is the stuff that needs to be fixed because,
It's like celebrating a pickpocket that decides to benevolently give you 20% of your money back that he took out of your wallet, and suddenly he's a hero in our society.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that?
So if the system changed once before, what is stopping it from changing again? But in the meantime, so present day, so we've kind of covered a little bit of the past as far as how we've gotten here. So in the present meantime, how do people survive inside the tax system we have today? So that's shifting into the wealth principle. And the kind of the conversation around the wealth principle in this episode is cash flow leakage, money escaping at every transaction point. You're not losing to taxes necessarily so much as you're losing to movement. So again, talking about how if the whole premise, or one of the premises of this show is to help people understand two things. One, how the system works. This is something that we've talked about ad nauseum, Kyle, with you and Karen in multiple shows, over the last however many months. Understand that system, understand how it operates, how it works. But secondly, how do you win within the system? How do you benefit? How do you differentiate yourself from the average person by that knowledge and by exercising the options that you have at your disposal? True?
Is it true that you?
Yeah, those premises are true. That it's important for people to understand the system, but also that there are ways that people can actually win within the system. If the system,
right? Yeah, you don't have to go way out of the system in order to win.
Yeah, it's just a matter of understanding what your options are.
Mm-hmm.
So, Kyle, from where do you see with the people that you interact with, and from a business standpoint, what would you say are the biggest leaks in the average person's financial life today?
Interest in taxes.
Yeah. Do you so from your perspective, do you see that there is more advantage to addressing the tax side, or because I know you talked about in the last show that you don't necessarily look at what you do as an infinite banking professional as a tax avoidance process. It's more really about learning how to better control access to your own capital.
Right.
So do you see that and the opportunity cost that you introduced also into a previous show, how do you see that balancing out between the tax advantages that do come with life insurance versus the interest control or the interest savings and that opportunity cost savings from the infinite banking concept?
So I don't know if this is going to answer your question exactly, but the vessel has holes in it and money's leaking out, right? So the question is it better to address whether that you're leaking more for taxes or you're leaking more from interest? I think that if we focus on it's best to focus on what we can control, right? And
Amen to that.
when we take control of the banking function and we put our money in a privatized contract that has an uninterrupted growth inside the policy, and we get to access without paying taxes on it because there's policy loans, then that's a win, right? Because interest is being saved because we're borrowing against our own money that, you know, we're collateralizing our capital, we're paying back to the insurance company, it's feeding us as owners of the company. And so there's wins all over the place because we're not paying as taxes on the growth, we're only paying taxes on maybe our income or whatever's the money's going into the policy. Outside of the policy itself, what we see with our clients is, you know, a big effort to try to avoid taxes as much as possible, right? And people will do that all sorts of different ways. People use trust strategies. They'll use investment strategies. They'll buy cars in December all day long so that they don't pay in taxes. My question is, was that decision to buy a car a smart decision?
Right.
Okay. Was your need to buy another investment property because you wanted to buy another investment property because you wanted to increase your cash flow, or was it because you've already depreciated your existing assets, and if you don't keep acquiring new assets to depreciate, the tax man is going to be catching up with you, right? And so eventually the taxes get paid eventually, right?
Right.
So it's if we're putting our money and we're utilizing statutory things like 401ks, 1031 exchanges, and real estate, different ways of going about real estate, IRAs, it doesn't matter. If we're using statutory trusts or statutory, what are they called? I'm blanking. Statutory stuff to do the business, eventually those taxes will come due. And I think that's what I've seen and is a little bit heartbreaking, is because people have been trying to play the game the best way possible, and they've served a lot of people for a long time. And then they're sitting there holding the bag that they had no idea grew that big, and now they pay taxes on it. So that to me is really sad. And so it's good to try to get out ahead of that beforehand. But when we make decisions solely on taxes, I don't know that's necessarily addressing the right, it's not focusing the energy in the right spot.
Yeah, for sure. Because for lots of different reasons. One, because like if you think you have an advantage because you get to allocate or set aside a certain amount of dollars pre-tax, the question you have to ask yourself is, well, what do you anticipate the taxable exposure or liability at some point in the future when you actually go to take it, right?
Yeah.
Nobody knows the answer to that question. I mean, for crying out loud, going back to talking about the historical aspect of the tax system, you know, when we started the income tax in 1913, it was 7% on the wealthiest 1% in the country. And it quickly jumped up to 77%. It went from 7% to 77% to cover some need of the government that got to dictate coercively what you had to pay. And you could expand the tax base by two ways. You could change the rate, and you can change the base. You can decide who pays and who doesn't pay. So that's a control factor that you don't get to have. So I think
the sooner we pay our taxes, the sooner we know we have control. That's
right.
where I stand.
That's right.
And let's not forget that it wasn't that long ago, historically speaking, where we did a major demonstration by dumping a bunch of tea into the harbor because of a small excise tax that the British put on that tea.
That's almost like hard. That's a concept that's almost hard to wrap our brains around now at this point in time, considering how far we have come from that makeup, right? Like,
what was the percentage that they were charging on that?
I was trying to remember, and I I don't want to quote it. It was small.
I mean, it wasn't just the T tax. There was the Stamp Act, and there was other things.
It was their mantra was no taxation without representation.
Sure.
What the statement they were trying to make is that the British were not letting the colonies represent themselves in the decision-making process.
Right.
I want to say it was like a 6% tax on tea. It was minuscule.
Right.
But the fact that they had to pay it and had nobody in their colony that was voting for or against it was what they were protesting.
But that is the thing that's crazy now, let's face it, because the bureaucracies, because of how many bureaucracies, we are always getting taxed or whatever, penalized by different things and regulations without any representation, because all those bureaucracies just do their own thing, make their own.
And it's commonly, the common conception is you elect somebody to go fix things and they never seem to fix it. They seem to come back corrupt and much better off financially with all the insider trading than what they actually got elected on.
Well, I think you could argue that we still have taxation without representation. I think it's fair to say that. Kyle, would you like more of the Million Acre Bourbon?
No, I'm good right now.
You're going to do the one and done today?
I don't know. I'm just good right now.
Okay, right on. Do you want anything else, honey?
No, I'm good.
How you doing, Michael?
I'm going to try the Million Acre Bourbon. So.
Okay. Well, when you try it, let me know, because I'm going to take some of that too.
Okay.
All right. But whenever you're ready, I don't want to force you. One of the other aspects of that, I think too, Kyle, is that the whole, we talked about in the last show, the title of that show was Stop Losing, Start Looping, right? So like, it's interesting to me that we get very fixated on like the tax rate itself, but we don't address when the taxation actually occurs and how that breaks the loop of that ability to build wealth.
Well, and that's why, Nelson always said it's not about rate, it's about volume, right? Who cares what the tax rate is? How much money are you losing to taxes? That's the question.
Yeah.
Total.
Yeah.
Not the rate, it really doesn't matter, because rates can change all the time, but and it's honest, it's just confusing, it's noise. But when you see the percentage of the dollars ultimately that is out, like if you lose $20 out of every 100 that you make, I mean, that's...
I've been watching the property taxes thing. Interestingly enough, California does not have high percentage taxes on property. That blew my mind. People are paying some of the highest property taxes in the country in California, but their property tax rate is towards the lower end. So
how does that work?
It's because of their
values
value
are so
of
high.
the properties.
Yeah.
If it's a $2 million property,
right,
you can have a smaller percentage and still make more money.
I mean, look at Madison County compared to, I don't know about your Lewis and Clark County, but you're in Madison. You're paying a higher tax rate in your county than we're paying here in Jefferson County because of Big Sky.
Yep.
Because Big Sky is part of your county.
Yep.
Because the property rate values are so much higher.
And it's affecting farms and ranches because they're trying to get more money from Big Sky.
Yeah. Yeah. So I kind of stole your question, Michael, away from you, because the question I was going to ask you is the real issue tax rates, which we kind of just talked about, or how often money gets exposed to taxation? Because if you think about it, in this day and age, you're taxed, again, the whole movement concept, you're taxed on entry, right? Money comes into your life. So you're taxed on entry of that money coming into your life. You're taxed when you're sitting there holding it, and if it has any growth, that gets taxed.
That's right.
And then you're taxed on the exit when you go to take it. So it's like you get hit at every single point in the loop, so to speak. So from a wealth building standpoint, in the current tax system that we have, the ability for somebody to truly get ahead and grow real wealth, if they follow the recipe that is outlined of this is, you do these things, and this is how you make money, you spend money, you might earn some money on set aside, but you're breaking your loop, your wealth building loop, so many times in that cycle that your ability to actually get ahead and like really accomplish anything with your money is limited. And so
I think like Kyle said, I think it plays too big a role. Taxes should not play as large a role in the decision-making process for entrepreneurs as they currently do. It's hampering productivity and it's hurting everybody, even the people that don't pay taxes. It's hurting them too. What made America great was a free market society where you identify a need, you fill that need, and by filling that need, you get rich. That's literally what Rockefeller did and so many others. And nowadays, you identify a need, you examine how much that's going to cost you in taxes and regulations, and then you may or may not decide to move forward because of that alone. Mm-hmm. And that is really hurting America as far as the global scale, and it's hurting us as individuals that taxes and regulations are one of the major decision-making factors as an entrepreneur if you want to go into this. I mean, I have kids that are starting businesses right now, and it's literally playing into the decision-making process of it's no longer about what are the needs out there. It's about net, like we said at the beginning. What's the strategy that will give me the best take-home, not what's going to fill the biggest need society has right now.
Were you looking up something, Kyle?
I was.
You want to share it?
I read this earlier this morning, and the problem that was happening was the Israelites were focusing on the wrong things. They were focusing on building their own stuff, living in their own places, not even recognizing that the entity had not been built correctly. And so there were consequences of that. Haggai 1 verse 6 says, you have sown much and harvested little. You eat, but you never have enough. You drink, but you never have your fill. You clothe yourselves, but no one is warm. And he who earns wages does so to put them in a bag with holes.
Oh, a bag with holes.
Like, it's not just about the taxes. This is what I'm saying is like what we focus on matters. Mm-hmm. Right? They hadn't built the wall around their city. So they were losing money to thieves. They were losing because they were constantly having to defend the space that they were all living in because they didn't do what they went there to do, which was build back the wall. Build it up, make it robust, and then pour into your stuff. Because until you do, you're going to be putting money into a bag with holes. You're going to be sowing and not harvesting everything that you've sowed in. So it's where are our priorities? And this is where I come back to the car thing. Like we're buying cars to prevent what? Leakage? Like you're consuming, you're leaking to prevent leakage.
Mm-hmm.
But aren't we good Americans if we consume like to the fullest extent of our
best Americans?
Like that is what we're encouraged to do, right? Consume more and
no, it is, and that's what I'm saying is like the messaging, the marketing, the noise is all centered around moving money and energy and attention away from what matters.
So what matters?
What matters is building the wall.
Building the wall.
You build that wall, and for some, that's a trust. For Rockefeller, that was a trust system, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that trust got smashed by Mr. Roosevelt, kind Mr. Roosevelt, and he built 1,000 more trusts, mm-hmm. and. So for some people that's trust. For some people that's a myriad of statutory businesses such as like LLCs or S corps. For some people, that's just a healthy banking system. Like it differs for every single person.
Yeah.
But as long as we're focusing on consuming better or borrowing better or buying smarter, we're not thinking about the ownership portion of it. The ownership portion is essential.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Karen, do most people focus too much on income and not enough on the control that Kyle's talking about?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Everybody's always fixated on what they make, but how much they keep, by their decisions on how they borrow and how they spend and all of those kinds of habits ultimately end up truly helping somebody build wealth versus just chasing that next 50 cents an hour. If they were more strategic in what they were doing, they end up wealthier.
I mean, go ahead.
You're talking about taxes, and I'm thinking just keeps coming back to my head is this is another thing that we can't control, right? And so the ownership portion is, for me, it is what is it that we can control? And someone just shared a quote with me, plan ahead because it wasn't raining when Noah built the ark. And that's where I feel like we're failing is we don't know what the interest rates of the future is going to be. We don't know what the tax rates of the future are going to be. We don't know what the government policies of the future are going to be. So what do we need to do today that helps us get an advantage in whatever the future might become?
So going from core out, individual, family, community, state, federal, global, what do you have the most control over?
Oh, definitely individual. I would say family, but my wife would differ.
Well, to have a strong family, you have to be a strong individual,
Yeah,
right?
I know, I'm joking.
Yeah. So I have no idea where I was going with that, but I just think I agree with Karen and I were just talking about this the other day. It's like, I used to be very fixated on the kind of the political noise that the world that we live in, and when I kind of finally realized that, man, I have really virtually no control over what happens politically speaking, in the grand scheme of things. And all I can really do is figure out how to shore up my own, myself, how do I find myself? Like, what do I need to do to, regardless of what happens with the things that I can't control, which is what you're saying, Kyle, how do we prepare ourselves and protect ourselves from whatever those circumstances look like? And I think that's the crux of how people can really help themselves is, again, like what you're saying, shift focus, like stop fixating on the wrong things.
We're asking the wrong questions.
Right. Yeah. Look at everything and how it all works together and figure out where you can have like financial redundancies and things like that are supporting each other and ultimately protecting you long term, no matter what.
Yeah. So so as far as what cash flow efficiency actually looks like, and we have started talking about this already, but is the real problem the real problem we've already established, the real problem is not the system itself, but how people interact with it. So I'm curious, Kyle, from your perspective as an example, how does the infinite banking concept change the role of savings? Just as one example, like if people have a piss poor savings rate, how does the introduction of the infinite banking concept change that for them?
Savings is optional, right? Generally speaking, right? So infinite banking kind of at its core supports the mindset of making savings become more required. If you implement infinite banking correctly, the premiums are required. Whatever the amount is different for every single person. It becomes a commitment in your budget that you're funding your savings account, basically. And then you get to collateralize that to use it for whatever you want. But as long as it's just another option in your own cash flow plan, whether it's envelopes or bank accounts or whatever, as long as it's only an option, we generally don't do it, especially if we run into an issue where we would like to spend money in a different spot. Then it's really easy to stop paying money into the savings account and start paying money over here. Whereas when you use infinite banking, let's just say I've got, $100,000 in a infinite banking cash value, right, that I can go leverage and do something with, and I choose to buy a new side-by-side for 20 grand. Well, that's awesome, except now I see I'm going to be paying interest on that 20 grand that I borrowed from the policy. So it forces me to address, like, is this a worthwhile spend of my savings, or would it be better to spend that 20 grand on, something that's going to cash flow for me,
right?
Something like that. Whereas if that was in a savings account, if I had 100,000 in a savings account and I took 20,000 out for a side by side, it doesn't matter. Like, I don't see an actual hole. I just see less money. So there's no need for me to pay it back, because now it's just an $80,000 fund instead of a $100,000 fund. Whereas the IBC policy was a $100,000 asset that has a $20,000 hole. It changes the way that we think about where our money is going and how we pay it back. So it makes savings more intentional.
It's an interesting one for me because that was, as a liability advisor, because everybody is always looking at the how do I make more and I can't save more unless I make more. And I'm like, well, let's look at that massive list of debts you have there and structure them in a different way, because you're so determined. Well, gee, if we got these credit cards under control or got whatever else it happens to be in a better structure, oh, look, now all of a sudden there's this extra however much a month that you can save now, and you can start putting somewhere to do something. So it's always an interesting one to, help people. Again, what's more important, making more, saving more, but it's what you keep, not necessarily what you make.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, is that's one of where people get a little sideways on when they hear about the infinite banking concept being like they're not contractually, it's the foundation or the base of it is the whole life policy. And I think that people it was interesting when I was in horseshoeing school, they taught you that the problem we have is that we have this our brain, the way our brain works is you stand you pick up a horse's hoof and you look at their hoof and you recognize the idiosyncrasies of that horse's hoof, and then you put their foot down, you walk to the forge, and then you go to shape the shoe to fit that horse's idiosyncrasies. But the problem is that your brain replaces those idiosyncrasies with an ideal picture of what the horse's foot's supposed to look like. So then you end up shaping the shoe incorrectly. Then you go to put the shoe on the horse and it doesn't fit. And you just kind of struggle with yourself so that you start looking at things like, you can't train your brain to look at things, compartmentalize and look at things differently. And I think that's one of the problems that people run into or encounter with the life insurance component of infinite banking, is that they hear life insurance and they start thinking that this is what, and this is where it becomes voluntary, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I am a father of 4 and I don't have life insurance, but it's an option. It's I don't really have to have life insurance. I will worry about that tomorrow. Where I think what you're saying is that when you change your lens or perspective on how you look at what you're actually doing with the way your money's moving through your hands, through your life, it does change the intention of how you play those premiums. What's the things Nelson says is the question becomes, it's not, oh my, you want people, people get it when they say, geez, how much premium can I pay? Right? As opposed to how much premium do I have to pay?
Yeah, it's always a funny switch when we see that happen with clients. But to your point, Nelson also said, rethink your thinking. That was one of his core thoughts all the time that he mentioned. Rethink your thinking. And most people's understanding of life insurance is based on someone else's misunderstanding of life insurance, right? And that can go across the board to everything. But that's why, I had this business coach and it was so funny. She's like, you sell life insurance. Why would you not tell people you sell life insurance? I'm like, you don't get it. I don't sell life insurance. I get paid when I do sell life insurance, but I help people take control of the banking function. Yeah. And everything is focused on that. So what I'm selling is a lifestyle of control and freedom. Life insurance happens to be the optimum vehicle, but only because we're focusing on how do you take control, not how do you get the right amount of coverage? How do you, make sure the contract is perfect? And, how do you get the best control? Why would you even want control? We have to rethink our thinking, and Wall Street definitely does not encourage us to think that way.
That's why they push the buy term and invest the rest.
And every other product they push.
Yeah, right. So what happens, though, guys, if the system itself changes and income was actually never taxed at all? So switching to the freedom implication of the show, there is actually a federal proposal that would flip the entire system back to something resembling pre-1913 America, a system where you're taxed when you spend, not when you produce. So what does everybody know about the Fair Tax Act? Have you ever heard of it? Have you heard of it? No? Have you?
I have.
You have?
Yeah.
I know you have. What do you think of it? What do you know of it?
I don't know all the particulars, so I would probably want to do a little more homework. I can't say I know all the particulars. I just know the generalities.
So Kyle, since you haven't heard of it, in a nutshell, basically just high level, just overview, what the Fair Tax Act, if it were passed, what it would do is it would eliminate federal income tax, not state income tax, just federal income tax, payroll tax, and capital gains tax. And it would replace those three taxes with a national consumption tax. So it would kind of take us back to where now the federal government is generating tax revenue based off of what we spend rather than what we produce. So, so it's interesting to me that this has been something that has been trying to happen for, gosh, at least 20 years. At least 20 years. I mean, it's obvious why, it runs into roadblocks and issues on getting any kind of real traction or
Yeah, going back to what I said of all the loopholes that are written into the current tax system where the people in the know don't actually have to pay anything.
Yep.
Yeah. So I guess the question becomes is the fair tax even politically realistic, or is it just a philosophical pipe dream?
It's not realistic because the politicians only make decisions 2 to 4 years. They only think 2 to 4 years down the road. All they think about is, what can I do to get reelected? And how do you tell people on welfare or people on government benefits, I'm going to take your money away, but vote for me? That's why I don't think it's ever going to pass. The problem with the Fair Tax Act is, like it was already stated, the people that are successful, the people that are in power, know how to use the current tax code to pay nothing. And it's only the less informed, the useful idiots that end up paying the taxes.
He's not talking
really
about you, Kyle.
I was hoping not.
So again, the selling point when all this stuff was passed is we're going to tax the rich. But the reality is that the rich will never pay those taxes.
They have the best accountants.
The rich are rich because they're smart. I mean, to put it plain and simple, the rich are rich because they're smart, and they're going to stay that way. There are exceptions to every rule, but generally speaking, if you have multi-generational wealth, you have it because people were smart in building it and people are smart in maintaining it. And no matter what the tax code is, those people will make decisions to maintain their wealth. The problem is there's people who have this idea that the government is there for my best interest and the government is going to take care of me. And like I said earlier, we're asking the wrong questions. You can't change anything until you change your own mindset. If people view the government as their savior, if people view the government as their doctor, as their retirement planner, as all of these things, you will never change anything. You might replace it, but you'll replace it with something as bad or worse every time.
So I'm going to ask you a similar question to what I proposed or asked in the last show that we did with Kyle is, what do you think what do you believe is the percentage of people, Americans, that tax-paying Americans that are, or actually a lot of them probably don't pay tax, actually, technically. What percentage of Americans actually feel the way that you're expressing, Michael, that I'm okay with the $39 trillion in debt and as a country, and as long as I keep getting my programs, my programs don't go away, and the federal government keeps finding ways to fund it. Because that's an important question, right? Because if we have passed a tipping point, then this is all just mental masturbation. Then we don't we don't get to hit a reset and go back to a pre-1913 taxation system, just as one example.
I would say we're really close if we haven't already passed the tipping point. I don't know those exact statistics. What I do know is that there's a real shortage of people willing to take responsibility, and you can't be a free people unless you're willing to take responsibility. Freedom only works with people who are moral and willing to take that responsibility. So I don't know if it's possible for America to be free anymore. I really don't. I hope that there's more people than I realize that feel the same way I do. But when I look around, when I interact at grocery stores, at events, at business functions, by and large, the people that I interact with are people that just want to be comfortable, and that's what they care about most. And if that's truly the mindset of the majority of Americans, then we've already passed our tipping point. There is no way to come back from that short of something really ugly.
Well, that's the thing is when there's no consequence for an action, why care? Like, why take responsibility for fixing any of this issue that we're in? It doesn't make sense to do because you're going to take responsibility, but however many billion other people aren't going to. Well, that just puts you in a net negative.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, we take care of our, I think it's important that we take responsibility of our own stuff, but then beyond that, short of the things getting ripped out of our own homes to pay for the taxes, like no one's going to care. I really don't think they're going to care about the actual dollar amount.
This is kind of a dark conversation, isn't it?
Something I do know a little more about, my family is big into self-defense, which I believe is a form of taking responsibility.
Sure.
And our mindset is when seconds count, help is only minutes away. Basically, if you're dependent on government officials to protect you, then you will never be protected, especially in rural areas like this, because they just can't respond quick enough to stop a fire or a home intruder or anything like that from having negative, that they get there in time to write up the report is all they can actually do. So, I've been involved in that world for a while, and I've seen it's a very small percentage of people that are prepared and trained and have the mental wherewithal to know what would I do in these situations that are prepared to actually take responsibility. That by and large, most Americans just expect that no matter what happens to them, the government will protect them. There's always 911. There's always somebody that you can call. And I don't have to worry about that because that's what we pay people for.
Well, we live in a very, we tend to be reactively driven as opposed to proactively incentivized, right? And I, in the last show, a question that I had asked, Kyle came back with a Buckminster Fuller, right? 5% of the population thinks, 10% think they think, and 85% would rather die than think. So I guess my
Which really depressed me.
Well, I did appreciate your optimism, thinking that there was like 50% of Americans that would actually think. But I guess this is a derailment. So I don't want to go too far down this path, but I'm just curious because you brought up a very interesting parallel with the whole self-defense concept. So with that world, what percentage of Americans do you think actually own up to that? So 5% think, 10% think they think, 85%.
How many can take care of
Well,
themselves?
this is totally from the gut. I haven't researched any of this.
Of course.
In my experience, I would say that there's 5% of Americans that are willing to and ready and trained for defending their families and their communities. There's probably 50% of Americans that own a bunch of guns and are not trained and don't have the mindset to use them. And then there's probably a lot more Americans that think guns are evil. So I would say that in reality, maybe 5 out of every 100 people you meet are carrying a firearm and are trained how to use it and have already thought through the process of, would I be willing to pull the trigger to save someone's life? Everybody else either thinks they're cool or is dependent on the government to solve their problems.
5%, really? You think it's that?
I think it's 5%
Out here.
or less.
Yeah, here.
Yeah.
But
Definitely not in like LA or New York or something like that for sure.
Well, so this is a very interesting premise because the whole everything that we're trying to accomplish and do with this show and with the New Frontier and financial advocacy, it really kind of hinges on the fact that there are people out there that are willing to take, they're, oh shoot, I was going to say about that. See, this darn Million Acre Bourbon always gets me every time.
Goes to his head.
Yeah. But
Well, when you're thinking about it, I would say that it's interesting because God love it, because there are always those people who do what's needed. You know what I mean? Like, thank God we have the 5% or even the 10% that think they think. The people who are trying, who are always step up and do what we do need.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I remembered it, so I have to interject. The concept of self-government or self-governance, right? So this is the tricky part, right? So we built a nation, a country around the premise that the people, we made them sovereign, we gave them the ability to govern themselves, and we deployed this government system in order to protect those rights in order for that to happen. But everything we're talking about, whether it is the tax system, the self-defenses, or the strategies like infinite banking concept, the all-in-one loan, if people, the common denominator is if people are not there to step up in that role. I mean, and government's the same way, right? We allow our government to just do what it does without assuming any real responsibility or stepping up and doing what is entailed. Like, so I asked a question about, is the fair tax politically realistic or just a philosophical pipe dream? There's no reason why the fair tax couldn't be implemented, but it would require enough of the people to step up and say, we want this to become a reality. So if that isn't feasible, if people are not willing to do that, then it's true, those kinds of things will never change. They will never happen. So what does that mean, trickle effect around the table, as far as, does that mean that it's never going to change, that there aren't going to be more people that take on a self-defense role, that there aren't going to be more people that are going to warm up to the notion of doing things differently, like deploying an infinite banking concept or strategy in their life, like that when people go to buy a home, that they're not going to say, you know what, I'm not just going to listen to what Rocket Mortgage says, and I'm going to actually listen to what somebody advises as far as other options that I have available to me that make more sense. Like, I guess that is ultimately the question that we have to answer, is where are we in that struggle?
as long as everything is comfortable and nothing's changing. I think that's what I've seen with people across the board, is they start opening up to options when things become more real.
Pain.
Pain.
You mentioned in a previous show, pain. People need to feel
it's
pain.
super important.
Yeah.
You know, when we've built a padded life in America, and we are constantly refocused away from reality with marketing, with social media, with all these things that just frankly don't matter. They don't have an immediate impact on us. But what they're doing is they're redirecting us away from the pain that we should be feeling, because we're not taking steps in X direction or Y direction or whatever. So I would say until people stop or turn off those guards against the signals, I should say, we're not going to start we're not going to see a change. But that being said, there's always going to be the people that are pushing themselves outside of their comfort zone, which invokes pain. Those are the business owners. Those are the disruptors. Those are the aggressive people. Those are the successful people. And historically, there's always been slaves. There's always been employees. There's always been worker bees. And then there's always been the royalty. There's always been whatever the wealthy are. There's always those two echelons. And we like to say that there's middle class in America. It's just more comfortable worker bees. That's what the middle class is, right? So that's where like the people that are willing to, that are thinking, the people that are thinking and are willing to rethink their thinking, they're going to look for options to change this stuff. The rest of the people, which is the high majority of the people, all they want is comfort. That's it.
And you know what's crazy about that? We were just talking about this the other day, that the crazy thing is it's what's the movie with the George
It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life. Yeah. When he talks about these are the people doing the living and the working and the dying and blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, interestingly, so many people, and it is a staggering number that turn into pawns. And we're all part of them very often, as far as the system, because look at anything, honestly, even look at the American Revolution, right? 250 years ago, a bunch of really smart men said, I think there's a better way to be. But most of the people who they got riled up on their side to actually fight and do that, their life really was not going to look any different whether the crown was in charge or whether we had this free country.
Right.
It really wasn't. And it is cool, the American experiment, because of things like somebody who was born into poverty all of a sudden becomes a millionaire because he has a brilliant idea. And we do have those amazing opportunities, but for the vast majority of people who get riled up and end up fighting the wars for us or whatever it happens to be, and not for us, but for the whoever's gotten them to, when you look at it, there were people who stayed with the crown and there were people who were like, yeah, I love this new idea, but it didn't really matter. Either of their lives was pretty much the same no matter what. So it's interesting to me how much, I guess for some level at some point when people just aren't listening, it's because, again, they're comfortable.
Yeah.
And they do get at some point that my life doesn't really look that much different whatever the tax system is. It doesn't really matter. Like, I don't really actually see a difference in it. And that is actually a weird part of life. My dad's 94 and
totally
all of this
weird.
changes he's seen in his lifetime, really not that much has changed. Like, life's not that much different. All the different things he's lived through.
I'm gonna wrap things up by asking you guys one more question. Let's just, based on the conversation we're having, if nothing changes systemically, what should individuals do differently starting now? What does quote unquote taking control actually look like in practical terms? And you can answer that in any way you want. What's the message you want to get out to anybody that's watching this, for the 5 people that, might be tuning in?
I think that principles matter. I think that I can only speak for myself. I think that decisions should not be made based on how they will be received, based on how popular they will be, or even based on how comfortable it will make you and your family. I think decisions should be made based on what's the right thing to do. And I think that for me, that has to be the deciding factor. Even if the decision hurts me in the short term, I believe doing the right thing matters. And I believe that at the end of our lives, we were here for a purpose. And I think that fulfilling that purpose and stepping into that calling is really all that matters. Otherwise, we're wasting oxygen.
You ever read the poem Guy in the Glass
I have not.
from the 1930s? You should check it out. It speaks to that very thing. It's interesting. It's like you can fool everybody around you but yourself. At the end of the day, you look in the glass, and if that guy looking back at you is you can't lie to them. And it resonates, right? You feel it in here. You know before you put your head on your pillow at the end of the day, how you lived your life that day.
I did an interesting concept when I was thinking towards marriage and I was engaged to Janessa. I decided that the best thing I could do to prepare for that would be to interview people who I called wise men, older men who had been around for a while, who were successful either in business or in marriage or in other aspects of their lives. And so I identified all the men in my circle that I considered wise men, and I interviewed each of them. And it was interesting, and it was a great project for me to do as an 18-year-old because it changed a lot of my thinking. For example, I never interviewed one guy who said he wished he had worked more hours or got another promotion or had a little bit more in his savings account. But I interviewed a lot of men who had regrets about decisions they'd made in their lives for things that seemed important at the time, but by the end of their lives really didn't matter.
You should have taken all those notes and turned it into a book.
I have the notes. I don't have a book.
What the hell are you waiting for? Come on, man. You can just plug that into AI and it can spit out a book for you.
Mm-hmm.
Kyle, do you have any thoughts on the concept of what people can do for taking control today, regardless of if nothing changes systemically?
I mean, my first recommendation would be for people to read the book Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. I mean, it's just that attitude, it starts at such a fundamental level. Like, if you can't take ownership of the decisions that you're going to make, if you can't take ownership of the way that your family is living, of the way that you're engaging with your community, of the way that you handle your finances, then it really, like, the bigger picture stuff, you may as well not even care.
That's the problem, though, right? That's the reason why people don't care.
Is because they're not taking ownership.
Because they haven't read Jocko's book.
Heck of a sales pitch.
I expect kickback.
No, it's most of us, I think, would rather die than think. I really do think it's 85% or higher of people would be in that category. And what can we do? Fill our mind with people or with things that are saying take ownership. Fill our life with people that take ownership. Like you were saying, before you get married, you talk to people that you want to maybe emulate.
Mm-hmm.
Because who we are around and what we fill our mind with is what creates who we are. I think it's super important. So, like, yeah, I talk to people all the time about taking ownership of the banking function, and I genuinely hope, as many people do. Like, I want everybody to do it, but
it's important. It's important to identify at least one thing that you feel like you can have a part or role in helping people deploy in their own life.
And I'm good at that.
Yeah.
Like, I can help deploy that.
Yeah.
But my encouragement would be to start smaller than that. Like, how are you taking ownership of your decisions over your relationship? Because, I mean, if we don't do that at the end, I mean, that's where a lot of those issues come from with the successful people. And I know plenty of them that have made a lot of decisions that are really financially smart, but they destroy their life.
Yeah.
It's just not worth it.
Yeah. All right.
I'd say don't be afraid. Like, it's always amazing to me, especially around money decisions. I anytime somebody comes and they're like, I'm just not a numbers person. I'm like, don't worry. Like, nothing says you have to be a math genius or be an investing guru to understand and take ownership of your very own personal finances. And it starts by actually pulling back the aperture and looking at how everything is working together and truly seeing not just, okay, well, I do this with my money here and I do that with my money here, but just stop corral it all together in your mind and see where things, and take the time to learn. I'm not saying hours and hours a day or hours a week even, but just at some point, at least get perspective to have the comfort instead of just saying, I'm not good at that. I'm just not going to. I'm just, whatever. This is what my employer told me to do, and therefore that's what I'm going to do. Like, really, is that necessarily the person you're going? So that, and I think that it makes me sad how many people are actually afraid to learn, because I think we've almost been put in this brainwash, like, you don't know, you just do what we say, and so yeah, that would be mine.
Well, I would say on that note, that's a great segue. Thanks, honey. You set me up really well, is to say that if somebody wants to carve out an hour a week to that learning process, they could subscribe to the show and actually consume some different kinds of information, and they can use the link in the description to receive a free 30-minute consultation if they want to learn more a little bit more hands-on basis, or they can join the Treasure community and they can get access to a lot more conversation and information and opportunity to explore the things that we talk about. And they should take advantage of the code Treasure and purchase Willie's products, because that is something that happens one choice at a time. And are you laughing at me?
No, I'm just make the choice right before you start buying the bottles.
Right. Make sure you pick the right bottles. That's why we do. That's why we make a point of trying to cover all the different products on the show, so people can choose what 3 bottles they want to buy. But I want to end the show on a positive note, because I feel like we have been a little bit hard on humanity, and I just want to ask everybody to just share really quick, because we have to get Kyle on the road. Give me a win. Tell me something, give me a story that we can walk away from feeling good about humanity from your own personal experience of a situation where you've encountered an experience with somebody and you're like, this gives me hope.
I'll go first because I have one.
Okay.
One of the things I love is honestly anytime. I love helping everybody, but first time home buyers, like when you get that person in the first home, because we know, not only is it near and dear to our hearts, but when you actually look at net worth, how much you are actually enhancing somebody's net worth by getting them into home ownership. And now that, when you talk about savings, there is at least part of that mortgage payment that's always going to principal. And so they are building up equity somehow because they're making that payment for their own mortgage instead of their landlord's mortgage. And so that's always a win, because it's always a lovely thing to see the pride that comes into somebody when they get to actually buy that first home.
Yeah, but do you have a specific, give me without giving names, obviously, what's a specific example of like this person's situation was this, and this is what they did, and this is what it...
I mean, I don't know how to do that without getting a little more,
All right.
than
So I'm not in the financial world like you guys, but I can speak to the world that I am in. Being in the homesteading world, the farming world, what I can tell you is that I've been to a lot of conferences, and I've got a lot more on the schedule for this year. And it's been fascinating to me that several of the conferences I've been to lately, half the people that pay and go and take time off of work and get hotel rooms or Airbnbs in order to make that happen don't own land. They don't have farms. They don't have ranches, but they're taking responsibility for their health. They care about what goes into their bodies. They care about the quality of their food supply, and they're making it a priority to plug into these things, even though they are not currently in a position to have a huge impact. And I think that is incredibly exciting. I think that the young people that I'm running into at these events and the traction that I'm seeing building at these events is very encouraging, that for all the criticism that the younger generation is getting right now, I will say that maybe better than the rest of us, they understand that their decisions have consequences, and they're making some decisions based on quality of life rather than focusing all their identity in career or finances or some of the things that previous generations have really put a lot of their identity into that maybe don't matter in the end as much.
Cool. I appreciate you sharing that. That's a good one.
I've got a specific win based on the topic today. I had a client that had a 7-figure tax problem. And
Figure. That's a lot.
yeah, it's a lot. And he was able to finance those taxes out of his own privatized banking system, which means that he paid the IRS, but it was out of his banking system, which means that the money never left the banking system. It's still growing on interest, even though he paid his tax man 7 figures. So that's a huge win.
Yeah, for sure. Because at the very least, he gets to, it's an expenditure, but at least it's done in a way that he doesn't actually deprive himself of compounding growth.
Yep.
So awesome. Well, thanks, guys. Thank you, Kyle, for coming back down. Michael, for coming back in. Thanks, honey. You guys good?
Thank
Yep.
you guys.
Thank you, John.
Okay.
Now I gotta run back to Montana. I had my